Welcome to the Yahweh Broadcasting Network. I am your teacher, your mayor, Ben Yahweh. What a joy it is to be with you on this evening's broadcast, as together we grow in the Torah, the Tanakh, the Brit Hadashah, and the Bezorah. For what purpose? That we might be the image that Father Yahweh created us to be, and that we might walk in the lifestyle that Father Yahweh created us to walk in, his likeness. Once again, shalom. On this evening's broadcast, we're going to continue our topic, and that is studying the book of the Maccabees as it relates to Hanukkah. I say it again, Hanukkah. A lot of times, the sons and daughters of Yahweh, we hear about things like Hanukkah, but some individuals don't really understand what Hanukkah is all about. And when I say they don't understand what Hanukkah is all about, I don't mean they don't understand that Hanukkah is on a certain day of the week in a particular month. A lot of them know that. I'm not talking about that they don't know that Hanukkah is a time that the sons and daughters of Yahweh exchange presents for 8 days. A lot of believers understand the traditional custom side of Hanukkah, but they really don't understand where Hanukkah developed. And Hanukkah developed, beloved, in a book that is really a part of the canon of Israel. And that is, it's the book of Maccabees. And in the book of Maccabees, the account of Hanukkah is provided. But along with the account of Hanukkah comes all of the insight and particulars about how Hanukkah was developed. In other words, within the books, that's plural, of the Maccabees, we find out where Hanukkah and what Hanukkah is all about. So starting tonight, we are going to read from the books of the Maccabees. And I think that you are going to be quite surprised at how some of these books that didn't make the cut as it relates to the compilation of scripture from a non-Hebraic standpoint, some books were really a part of the overall structure of the Hebraic side of scripture. In other words, Israel had books within them that were not included in the canon, but were really, they were really in some ways more involved, more, what word am I looking for? They were more in line with what the Torah was, it speaks about. Then some of the books that were added to the canon. Let me read some of these books. They're called the list of Apocrypha. And some of these books, matter of fact, the majority of these books provide great insight to scripture. And if you get a chance, you should read some of these books. But let me just give you some of the names of these books so you can at least be aware of them. And then we're going to get into Maccabee. The first book is called Tobit, then Judith. Then there's a book called The Addition to the Book of Esther. Then there's the Wisdom of Solomon. Then there's the Wisdom of Yehoshua or Joshua. Then Sarah. Then there's the book of Baruch. Then there's the book of, or the letter of Jeremiah. That's Jeremiah. Then there are additions to the book of Daniel. Then there is a book called the Prayer of Azariah and the Song of the Three Jews. Then there's a book called Susanna. Then there are books called First, Second, Maccabees, and Third and Fourth Maccabees. And those are just a few, but I thought that you would be interested in knowing that, so you can maybe do some of additional reading about these books that really line up with Torah, give a lot of great insight. Well, tonight we're going to deal with the book of First Maccabee, chapter 1. And it's going to set the stage for the foundation for what Hanukkah is all about. This first book of Maccabee is going to set the foundation for what Hanukkah is all about. We're going to read starting at chapter 1, verse 1. And we have quite a bit of reading, so I will read and then I will give some insight. Some insight won't be really in-depth insight, but it will be insight that will help add understanding and wisdom and knowledge to what Yahweh would have us to grab hold to as it relates to Hanukkah. Here we go. And it happened after that Alexander, the son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Hattim, this Alexander had smitten Darius, the king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece. And this Alexander that was spoken of in the very first verse is Alexander the Great. You may have heard him in some of your history classes. It was Alexander the Great that literally this verse is speaking about. Verse 2, Alexander made many wars and won many strongholds and slew the kings of the earth. Now we're talking about a non-Hebraic person here. non-Hebraic person that was not a part of Israel, but Alexander was a warrior. And this verse 2 says that he made many wars and won many strongholds and slew the kings of the earth. So he was a mighty warrior. That's why they called him Alexander the Great. Verse 3, and went through the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him. Whereupon he was exalted, and his heart, that is the heart of Alexander the Great, was lifted up. He was a very proud person. Verse 4, and he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings, who became tributaries unto him. In other words, they gave tribute to Alexander the Great. And he was, once again, Alexander the Great conquered many nations that were pagan, just like his nation was pagan. Because he was a mighty warrior. Verse 5, and after these things, he, that is Alexander, fell sick and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them. So he called his servants that were honorable and had been brought up with him from their youth. He called them, and he parted his kingdom amongst them while he was yet alive. Verse 7. So Alexander reigned 12 years, and then Alexander died. And his servants bare rule, every one in his place. All the individuals that he had given rule over some parts of his land. Every one of them bear rule in that place that he had given them after his death. Verse 9. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves. They said, well, Alexander is dead. Well, we better make sure those that are in our nations, our territories, understand that I'm the king. So they put crowns on themselves. So did their sons after them. So there was a succession of kings and leaders that came after those who Alexander put into place before he died. But it goes on, and evils were multiplied in the earth. So that lets you know that these goyim nations, these nations that were not a part of Israel, they were in the world, the Assyrians and the Greeks and the Latins, they began to evil multiplied in the earth. Remember, these were not Israelites. These were a part of the Goy nations, the nations outside of Israel. Verse 10. And there came out of them a wicked root. Now, pay attention. very closely from here forward. There came out of them, who's the them? The evil men that were multiplied on the earth from these Goy nations. An evil root came out of one of those nations. And the evil root, his name was Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes. I talked about him last night. For you that listened to the broadcast last night, I talked about this wicked emperor ruler by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes IV. This is who is being spoken of here in Maccabees. He was once again, he came out of that wicked group. His name was Antiochus, and he was surnamed Epiphanes. And we're going to get into both Antiochus and Epiphanes, what that means on Shabbat, this upcoming Erev Shabbat or Shabbat. I haven't really made up my mind yet. And he, that is Antiochus Epiphanes, was the son of Antiochus III, the king, who had been a hostage in Rome. And he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. So this Antiochus Epiphanes, the third and fourth, were Greek, Assyrian, Greek, Roman emperors, leaders. They covered those spans of nations. It goes on. Verse 11. In those days, there went out of Israel wicked men. Now there's a twofold chord going on here. We just heard about the wicked men of the world in these Goy nations that came under the leadership of Alexander the Great. We've been reading about them, and they ended up an evil men upon the earth. But verse 11 now says, and in those days went there out of Israel wicked men. Alexander the Great and all of these wicked nations that came out of Alexander the Great. They had placed an impact upon Israel. And because of this, Israel had now received the fleas from those pagan nations. That there's an old saying that if you be careful, because if you get too close to a dog, his fleas are going to jump on you. Where the fleas of these doggish pagan nations that were developed under the tutorage of Alexander the Great, these fleas had jumped upon, yes, even people that were a part of Israel. It goes on. Who persuaded many, saying, these are the wicked men within Israel, they began to persuade others. And this is what they said: let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. There's the flea group that are now going out and persuading others within Israel to be wicked just like them. They said, let us go and make a covenant. You know, let us go and do what we have to do to get along with these pagan nations and their wicked leaders. It goes on, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So these pagan nations of the Goy that were under the leadership of Alexander the Great before he died, evidently they put great pressure upon Israel. So much that here it says that they caused much sorrow on those that were in Israel. And that is one of the devices of Hasatan. You know, the word of Yahweh, you know, I'm always using that scripture. We shouldn't be ignorant of Hasatan's devices. One of the devices of Hasatan is to create pressure. He thinks, that is, Hasatan thinks, if he can create enough pressure, that he will create a group of people that are sorrowful. And if he can get an individual or a group of people that are sorrowful, he knows that these people are going to resort to what these wicked men of Israel are saying here. Let us make a covenant. And that is the reason why Hasatan puts pressure on you. He puts pressure on you so you can say, oh, you know, why don't we just go head on and be friends with these evil Goy individuals and nations? You know, it can't be worse. If we make friends with them, maybe they'll treat us better. But that's a lie. Hasatan's not going to treat you better. Let me speak to young people that are involved with the gangs. Hasatan is still working in your community the same way that he worked here. These Goy nations, these nations that were not a part of Israel, but controlled the geographical landmass of Israel and controlled the citizens within that landmass. These Goy nations made it miserable for Israel. And you might be living in a community that gangs are making it miserable for your community. And Hasatan is only placing his mark of fear and his mark of, control in that community. He's only doing it for one reason, that he might scare you, where you will come to the point where you will say, I'm going to join that gang. But understand this, beloved, young person who loves Yahweh. Understand this. Don't let fear and don't let the assault of the enemy cause you to bow down to them. If you're a son and daughter of Yahweh, you stand strong in Yahweh, in the power of his might. And we're going to find out later on up the road about a group of Israelites that said to these tyrant kind of individuals, they said to these Goyim nations, they said to the leadership of these Goyim nations, we will not bow down to you. And there was a group of Israelites that stood up. I'll give you a hint. This book is named after that group, the Maccabees. But that's all I'm going to tell you right now about the Maccabees. Let's read on. Verse 12. So this device pleased them well. So the people that had been placed, Israelites that had been placed in the position of recruiting other Israelites to join them in their fear, to surrender to these pagan nations and leaders that brought them sorrow. Those Israelites that did that, they were successful because it says, so this device pleased them well. They recruited. Verse 13. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. So these Jewish Israelites, these Israelites that fell down to these tyrants, they ended up going to the king of these pagan nations. And they informed the king that they would come under his leadership and do after the ordinances of those pagan nations. So now here you have Israelites that are bowing down their knees to Hasatan and his group because of fear. And leaving the ordinances of Yahweh and telling these pagan kings that they would now like to follow them in their ordinances that were opposed to Yahweh. Verse 14. Whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem. In other words, these Israelites that fell at the feet of these pagan kings and said, we're now going to follow your ordinances instead of the ordinances of the Torah. The kings of these pagan nations had Israelites to build what they called here a place of exercise at Jerusalem. They had them to build these pagan kings had Israelites to build in Jerusalem, here's a word for you: gymnasiums. Gymnasiums, you know, the word gymnasium is not a new word. Gymnasiums were constructed in pagan nations. And these gymnasiums were places where these pagan nations would practice abominable things. They would have homosexual acts they would perform homosexual acts in these gymnasiums. They would have prostitution going on in these gymnasiums. And here, the Israelites that were so afraid that they were willing to submit to these pagan kings to build gymnasiums in Jerusalem, the Kadosh, set apart city of Israel. These Israelites that had turned into goats submitted themselves to the authority of the Goyim kings, and they began to build gymnasiums within Jerusalem, places of abomination. You might say it was a whorehouse. Gymnasium was a whorehouse. It was a place where abominable things took place. Everything that Yahweh told them not to do, they did it in that gymnasium that they built. Now their hands, meaning these Israelites, these evil men within Israel, now their hands are being used not to grab hold to kadosh, set apart things, but their hands are now being used to build abominable things. Beloved, here's a warning. If you're a son and daughter of Yahweh, don't let fear of men cause you to begin to use your hands in that which Father Yahweh opposes. That means your lifestyle. Do not let Hasatan cause you to get involved with the same things that were going on in the gymnasiums of Hasatan in the Goyim world. Don't let Hasatan pull you into those gymnasiums and have you committing homosexual acts, acts of adultery, acts of fornication, abominable acts that Yahweh says no to. Verse 14, once again. Whereupon they built a place of exercise, gymnasiums at Jerusalem, according to the customs of the heathen. Verse 15. And made themselves uncircumcised. This is what Israel is doing. They've sold themselves over to the works of Hasatan, some of them. And now they're building whorehouses, houses of prostitution, houses of adultery, houses of fornication, houses of homosexuality, which are abominable houses. Now they're building them, but hold it. Now verse 15 says they made themselves uncircumcised. Yeah, they did in two ways. Even those that were circumcised, that got involved with pagan, fleshly, worldly things in the sex realm, they were using their set apart body part at that point, which was circumcision. They were using it to get involved in places that Father Yahweh never intended for that circumcised part to be involved with. Circumcision was a constant reminder to the males of Israel that one of the reasons that Father Yahweh has placed you on this earth realm is to procreate. But you're not to procreate just any kind of way you want to. You have got to procreate Yahweh's way. And that part of the male's anatomy, which is used to procreate, that is the part that Father Yahweh in his wisdom decided to circumcise. Somebody says, well, why did he circumcise that part of a man's anatomy? Because it was the will of Yahweh that Israel produced other sons and daughters that would give their lives to Yahweh. Procreation is something that Yahweh desires his sons and his daughters to be involved with. But he gave a sign to men to make sure that they use that part of their anatomy that Father Yahweh created for procreation. Use that part of your anatomy lawfully. Use that part of your anatomy kadoshly, set apart. Use that part of your anatomy to the praise and to the esteem of Yahweh. Don't you dare use that part of your anatomy to intrude the space or a place that Yahweh has not permitted you to do. You make sure that whenever you get to that place of using that particular part of your anatomy, sir, you remember that that particular part of your anatomy is circumcised. You can't use that part of your anatomy to sin, to do to do anything that is not permitted for you to do by Yahweh. You can't use that part of your anatomy for anything. Yes, you see me trying to move around some things. Yes, I am. I don't want to become too graphic, but at the same time, I want you to get it. They made themselves uncircumcised by doing with that part of their anatomy that which they were not supposed to do with it. They were having homosexual acts. And when they had that homosexual act, they were committing an uncircumcised act. They were committing an act that Yahweh didn't give them the right to perform. When they used that part of their anatomy that was circumcised to be used with a prostitute or someone that was married or someone that they weren't married to as single. When they did that, all of those things, they were committing an abominable act. And they made themselves uncircumcised. And I'm sure it went to the next level of when their sons were born, they told them, oh, you don't have to be physically circumcised. But it was a twofold thing. Those Israelites that were circumcised, that started using that part of their anatomy the wrong way, the act of using it the wrong way caused them to be uncircumcised. But the other way of uncircumcision was, yes, when some Israelites would have children, males, they just forgot about circumcision altogether. So it was both physical and spiritual circumcision. And that is what you need to understand as a son and daughter of Yahweh. Young man, young woman, understand that Father Yahweh has created you. And Father Yahweh has called you. And Father Yahweh has made you kadosh, set apart for his service. In your body, in your soul, they're not your own. They belong to Yahweh. And he's entrusted you to use them to his praise and to his esteem. And they made themselves uncircumcised and forsook the set apart covenant of Yahweh. They made themselves uncircumcised and they said, we are not going to follow the covenant that Yahweh has given us. We're not going to follow the Torah. We're going to follow, what did they say? The dictates of these pagan kings and heathens And last night, you knew what type of ideology it was. It was Hellenistic ideology. We're going to follow that. And join themselves to the heathen, which means Father Yahweh told them to only have relationships with people that were a part of Israel the right way. But by the time this happened, they were getting involved with heathens. They were having relationships with heathens. They would start to marry heathens and were sold to do mischief. Listen to that. And were sold to do mischief. Prostitution was going on even during this time in history. Israelites were selling themselves to Hasatan. Verse 16. Now, when the kingdom was established before Antiochus Epiphanes IV, he thought to reign over Egypt, that he might have the dominion of two realms, both Egypt and the realm of Israel, and the nations of that realm. Wherefore, verse 17, he entered into Egypt with a great multitude. This is Antiochus Epiphanes IV, with chariots and elephants. Elephants in those days were they were used like tanks in our military service today. Elephants were tanks. They would train elephants in these days to go through walls during war, and horsemen, and through the sea, meaning it was like they had a navy as well. And the Mediterranean Sea port and those seaports off of Egypt were entry ports. And Antiochus Epiphanes IV used land and sea to win his battles. Verse 18. Antiochus Epiphanes made war against the king of Egypt. But the king of Egypt was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded to death. So now Antiochus Epiphanes is not just bullying Israel. Now he's bullying Egypt, and the kings of Egypt flee. So now Antiochus Epiphanes has made a name for herself. And we're going to find out what that name was in broadcast to come. Verse 19. Thus, they got the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he, that is Antiochus Epiphanes IV, took the spoils thereof. Verse 20. And after that, Antiochus Epiphanes IV, after he had smitten Egypt, he returned again in the 143rd year and went up against Israel. Listen to this. He went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude. So now he comes back into the region of Israel and Jerusalem with the greater terror than he had before he left. Now he's caused the kings of Egypt to flee. He took all their spoils. Now he's coming back to Israel and Jerusalem with a bigger head than he had before he left. Verse 21. And entered proudly into the set apart temple, or the set apart place. Now Antiochus Epiphanes is making a straight line, not only into the land of Israel, not only into the city of Jerusalem, but now he's going to the heart of Israel, which is the temple of Israel, the Kadosh, set apart temple of Israel. Let's see what happens when he goes into that place. And he took away the golden altar and the candlestick of light. He took away the Holy of Holies. He went into the Holy of Holies and stripped it. He saw the menorah that was inside of the temple and replaced it. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And all the vessels thereof, whatever was in the temple, Antiochus Epiphanes IV felt that he was over. Nothing would be over him. That spirit, beloved, that was in Antiochus Epiphanes IV is still around today. It's in politics today. That spirit. Let me speak to you political leaders, you politicians, for a moment. Whether you know it or not, as a politician, you are going to manifest the spirit of Yahweh, or you're going to manifest the spirit of Hasatan. You're either going to be building things Yahweh's way, or you're going to be tearing down things Hasatan's way. And if your goal as a politician is to divide and tear down and cause havoc, you're bearing the spirit of Hasatan. That was the same spirit that was in Antiochus Epiphanes IV. In America here, we are going through we just got we've gone through an election period. You're accountable as a son and daughter of Yahweh to make sure that you don't put in a Saul into office. You're to put in Davids. These are only analogies that I'm using. You're to only put in people that at least they'll humble themselves to do righteous things. You put a person in the office that is, their purpose is to only tear down and to be corrupt and be immoral. You put that kind of person in office, you're going to be held accountable. Let me move on. I don't want to get into the political realm. So here we go. Verse 16. No, I'm sorry. We're down to verse let's go. We're down to verse 20. And after that, Antiochus had smitten Egypt. He returned again 143rd year and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude. We've read that already. Verse 21. And entered proudly into the temple, proudly, and took away everything that Yahweh had made a part of his set apart temple. Verse 22. He took away the table of showbread and the pouring vessels and the vials and the censers of gold and the veil and the crown and the golden ornaments that were before the temple. All of it he pulled off. He tore down. Verse 23. He took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessels. Also he took the hidden treasures which he found. 24. And when he had taken all away, he went into his own land, having made a great massacre and spoken very proudly. Killed a lot of people. I will say this, and I say it with caution to those that it is spoken to. Be careful, you that are in political, religious high places, that you don't justify the killing of innocent people that are on their way to be confronted at the borders of the United States. Antiochus Epiphanes IV, he went to his own land, having made a great massacre, and he was speaking proudly. Be careful of politicians who speak proudly of killing innocent people that are running from tyrants. They're running from tyrants. Only to come to a border that has assembled its military might to shoot and kill them if they throw a rock. Verse 25. Therefore, there was a great mourning in Israel. I guess so. He had killed many Israelites. Antiochus Epiphanes IV had killed many an Israelite. In every place where they were. Verse 26. So that the princes and elders mourned. The young women and the young men were made feeble, and the beauty of women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, and she that sat in the marriage chamber was in heaviness. The land also was moved for the inhabitants thereof, and all the house of Jacob was covered with confusion. There was total confusion in Israel by this time. They had lost their temple. They had lost everything that was inside of the temple of Yahweh. They had been, their morality was at a all-time low because they got away from Torah. Verse 29. And after 2 years fully expired, the king sent his chief collector, here comes the taxes, of tribute unto the cities of Judah, Yehudah, who came into Jerusalem with a great multitude. So now here comes the taxation, but backed up by military might. Verse 30. And spake peaceably and peaceable words unto them, but they were words of deceit. For when they had given him credence, he fell suddenly upon the city and smote it very sore. When they gave all that they had through deception, when Israelites gave all that they had through deception, the enemy still went through the city of Jerusalem and smote it very sore and destroyed much people of Israel, killed many people that were in Israel. And when he had taken the spoils of the city, Antiochus Epiphanes and his group, he set it on fire and pulled down the houses and walls thereof on every side. But the women and the children took they captive and possessed the cattle. So now these tyrants are putting women and children into slavery. Verse 33. Then builded they this, Then builded they the city of David with a great and strong wall, and with mighty towers, and made it a stronghold for them. So they're taking the city of David, Jerusalem, and they're making it their stronghold. They're taking what is Yahweh's and making it a stronghold for them. Verse 34. And they put therein a sinful nation, wicked men, and fortified themselves therein. Jerusalem is on a hill. No wonder they use that as a fortified place, because they can see everything below. Verse 35. They stored it also with armor and victuals. And when they had given all together the spoils of Jerusalem, they laid them up there. And so they became a sore snare. Verse 36. And it was a place to lay in wait against the set apart temple, and an evil adversary to Israel. Thus they shed innocent blood on every side of the set apart temple and defiled it. They used the set apart temple and they used Jerusalem to go against Israel. Verse 38. Insomuch that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them, whereupon the city was made a habitation of strangers. Jerusalem is no longer Jerusalem, it's now belongs into the hands of Antiochus Epiphanes IV and his group, and became strange to those that were born in her. Didn't look like Israel any longer, didn't look like Jerusalem any longer. And her own children left her. Verse 39. Her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness. And that is, a set apart temple was laid waste like a wilderness. The Moedim, her feast days, were turned in the morning, her Shabbat into reproach, and her honor into contempt. As had been her esteem, so was her dishonor increased, and her excellency was turned in the morning. Verse 41. Moreover, King Antiochus IV wrote to his whole kingdom. He wrote a decree to his whole kingdom. At this time, that included Israel and Jerusalem, that all should be one people. It sounds like a lot of things that are happening today in our government. Verse 42. And everyone should leave his laws. In other words, Israel, you're going to forget about the Torah and the Torah mitzvot. Forget about Yahweh's Torah, Yahweh's mitzvot. Forget about it, Israel. So that all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king, Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, he says, you're to follow this and not this. You're to follow Hasatan and not Yahweh Israel. You're to follow my directives and teachings and insights and boundaries, not Yahweh's. Don't you follow Yahweh's teachings, instructions, guidelines, directions, insights, and boundaries. You're to follow my way, Israel, Hasatan's way. That's going on today, beloved. You have religious groups that don't follow the way of Yahweh. You follow our statement of faith. You follow our religious creed. Verse 43. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion. They consented to the pagan religions of Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. They consented to Mithraism. And sacrificed unto idols and profaned Shabbat. Fear is causing Israelites to do this. 44. For the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, not the law of Yahweh any longer, not the law of the Torah any longer, but this strange law of Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, Mithraism, paganism, Sunday worship. Verse 45. And forbade the offerings of Israel, the sacrifice of Israel, and the drink offerings of Israel in the temple, and that they should profane the Shabbat and the Moedim, the set apart days of Yahweh and Shabbat. They were too profane. And pollute the set apart temple, and pollute the set apart people, the priests. Priests don't have no more authority over you. Antiochus Epiphanes IV says, I have authority over you. If you lift up your head in allegiance to anyone other than me, Antiochus Epiphanes IV, you will be killed. They polluted the set up altars and I'm sorry, they set up altars. They tore down the set apart temple and they set up altars of paganism and groves and chapels of idols, lords, and sacrificed swine's flesh, pig's flesh, and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all. (49) And to the end that they might forget the law, that they might forget the Torah, and change all the ordinances. And whosoever could not do according to the commandment of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, he said that person should die. In the selfsame manner wrote he to his whole kingdom, and appointed overseers over all the people, commanding the cities of Judea to sacrifice city by city. Then many of the people were gathered unto them quickly. Every one, they forsook the law. They had to make open confession that they would forsake the Torah. So they committed evils in the land. Yeah, when Israel, whoever went away with that pagan, idolatrous, Satan stuff that was within Israel, whoever went along with it, they committed an evil. And they drove the Israelites into secret places, even wheresoever they could flee for cover. Now, the 15th day of the month, in the 140th and 5th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar, and built idol altars throughout the cities of Judea on every side. Yehuda was the Hebrew city. Judah, no J's, it was really Yehuda. And burnt incense at the doors of their house and in the streets. If you're in a religion that is off into incense burning as a part of their culture, run. And when they had rent in pieces the books of the Torah, which they found, they burnt them with fire. And whosoever was found with any of the Torah, or if any committed to the Torah, the king's commandment was that they should be put to death. Thus did they, by their authority unto the Israelites every month, to as many as were found in the cities. Now the 25 days of the month, they did sacrifice unto the idols' altars, which was upon the altar in the temple of Yahweh. At which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women sacrificed in the temple, and had caused their children to be circumcised. So if they caused their children, if women caused their kids to be circumcised, they were put to death on pagan altars. And they hanged the infants about their necks. Wow. They not only killed the mothers, but the babies that they circumcised would be hanged. And and rifled their homes and slew them that had circumcised them. So they circumcised the handmaidens or the doctors. They slew them. They slew the babies, and they slew the mothers. However, verse 63, many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves not to eat any unclean thing. There were those within Israel that said, I don't care what they do to me, I'm not going to be a part of what Antiochus Epiphanes IV is doing. I'm not going to be a part of it. Wherefore they chose rather to die, that they might not be defiled with meats, that they might not be profane, that they would not profane the Kadosh covenant, the set apart covenant. So then they died. They died as martyrs. And there was very great wrath upon Israel. Well, we did a lot of reading tonight, but I wanted to make sure we got through all of chapter 1 of First Maccabees 1. You see what's going on here, beloved. You see the foundation work that Hanukkah is built upon. There's a tyrant in town. His name is Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Hasatan has worked through him to win so many battles that all of Israel, when I say all of Israel, I mean the people in Israel, feared him. He goes out and he takes Egypt. The kings of Egypt flee. He takes everything in Egypt, the spoils of Egypt. Now he returns to Israel and Jerusalem, a bigger tyrant than he was when he was there at first. While he's there, he begins to change the whole, we'll put it this way, the whole government structure of Israel. The government structure of Israel was based upon the Torah, just like it's supposed to be today. The Israelites were living under the Torah, but at this time, Antiochus Epiphanes IV said, no, the government changes. And he made it, that is, Antiochus Epiphanes IV made it a Hellenistic government with Hellenistic ideologies. They brought in gymnasiums. Their recreation was to do that which was opposed to Yahweh. They told Israel that they could no longer partake of the Torah. They could no longer call upon the name of Yahweh. They could no longer keep their Shabbats, their Shabbat. That they could no longer do the things that Yahweh told them to do. They could no longer study the Torah scrolls. They could no longer keep Shabbat. They could no longer keep the mitzvot. They could no longer keep the Moedim. They could no longer keep their dietary laws. They could no longer be circumcised. And they could no longer have the temple of Yahweh. As that which Yahweh had placed in their midst, no longer. They desecrated the temple. One tyrant under the possession of Hasatan. I'm telling you, beloved, as sons and daughters of Yahweh, we must stand, and after we've done all to stand, we must continue to stand in the things of Yahweh. Don't let fear direct your hands. Don't let fear grab hold to your soul. Don't let fear control your life. And don't let fear through a bully control you. You stand up for the things of Yahweh and know that Yahweh is Yahweh alone. We're going to get into the sons and daughters of Yahweh that stood up against this tyrant. We're going to get into who they are and what they did and how Yahweh gave them the victory in days to come. But meanwhile, you stay with us in this journey through the Maccabees. We went through Maccabee 1, chapter 1 this evening. Tomorrow we're going to go through Maccabee chapter 1, chapter 2. Stand. This is a good message for today. Hear me. This is a good message for the times that we live in right now. I don't care what tyrant of a leadership pops their head up. As a son and daughter of Yahweh, you say no to that. I'm not going to do what Hasatan through that leader is telling me to do. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stand on the Torah. I'm going to stand on the mitzvot. I'm going to stand on the word of Yahweh through his son Yahshua. And by the power of his spirit, Yahweh Kadesh, have the victory. Well, I sure pray that you grabbed hold to this evening's broadcast. Once again, we're laying a foundation for Hanukkah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. If you would like to send a thank you, tithe, offering, love, gift, contribution, and donation, do it this evening. You can do it by sending it by going to our website. Our website address is www.thetheark.org. Get to that website. You will see a link. It will say donation. Click it. It will lead you, take you, reroute you to PayPal. And it's through PayPal you can send your thank you, tithe, offering, love, gift, contribution, and donation. Well, beloved, it's been a real joy. We went over a little bit this evening. It's about 30 minutes or so. And I thank Father Yahweh for you. You won't regret it. We're getting through some foundational stuff that is going to be a blessing to you as we see the conclusion of the Maccabee story later on up the road. Stay focused, keep your soul and your heart and your mind and your lifestyle on the things of Yahweh. Hallelujah. Until tomorrow evening, this is Yirmiyah ben Yahweh saying to you, sons and daughters of Yahweh, as well as you truth seekers of Yahweh, as well as you Talmudim of Yahweh, you students and disciples of Yahweh. I say to you, I love you, I really do. And shalom.